My granddaughter shouted at lunch, "You're just a burden. Go to a nursing home and let us live." I simply walked out in silence. The next day, I canceled all the mortgage checks. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the dining table as I arranged the final fork. Sunday lunch had always been sacred in our family, even more so since I moved in with my son Thomas and his family 3 years ago. At 72, I took pride in these small contributions, setting the table, helping with the cooking, making sure everything was perfect for our family gatherings. "Mom, did you put out the good napkins?" Thomas called from the kitchen. Miranda's parents might stop by later. "Yes, dear," I replied, smoothing down the crisp white linen napkins I'd ironed that morning. The ones Miranda had specifically mentioned were appropriate for family meals. The cotton ones I'd brought from my old home were apparently too quaint for their new lifestyle. My fingers lingered on the polished mahogany table, so different from the worn oak table where I'd raised Thomas after his father died. That table had been the heart of our small home, where we'd shared meals, where I'd helped with homework, where we'd laughed and sometimes cried together. I'd sold that table along with the house to help Thomas and Miranda buy this mansion in Westlake Hills. "Grandma, you put the salad forks on the wrong side again?" My 17-year-old granddaughter Cleo sighed, sweeping into the dining room in designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. She dramatically rearranged the silverware, rolling her eyes as if my mistake was physically painful for her. "Thank you, dear," I said softly. "My eyes aren't what they used to be." That wasn't true. My eyesight was fine. But over the years, I'd learned that accepting blame was easier than causing friction, especially in this house where I increasingly felt like an unwelcome guest rather than family. Miranda entered, carrying the roast I'd spent the morning preparing. "Thomas, it's ready," she called, her voice shifting to that artificially bright tone she used when addressing me. "Clarice, why don't you sit down? You must be tired." I wasn't tired. I'd been sitting in my room most of the morning while Miranda took over the cooking I'd started. But I nodded and took my seat at the far end of the table, the spot that kept me farthest from the natural flow of conversation. Thomas carved the roast with flourish, serving Miranda first, then Cleo, then himself, and finally me. The conversation flowed around me. Miranda's latest charity committee drama, Thomas's golf game, Cleo's college applications. I listened, smiled at appropriate moments, and carefully avoided mentioning the letter I'd received yesterday from my old teaching colleague. She was organizing a European river cruise and wanted me to join. I knew better than to bring it up. "Mom," Thomas said suddenly, "don't forget you have that doctor's appointment on Tuesday. I've asked Mrs. Peterson next door to drive you since Miranda and I both have commitments." "I can take the bus," I replied. "I've been taking public transportation my whole life." Miranda laughed, that tinkling sound that never reached her eyes. "Don't be silly, Clarice. At your age, you shouldn't be wandering around on buses. What if you got confused or lost?" Before I could respond that I'd navigated public transit for decades without getting confused, Cleo snorted. "God, Grandma, just accept the ride. It's not like you have anything else to do anyway." I placed my fork down gently, the small clink against fine china punctuating the sudden tension. "Actually, I was thinking of meeting some old friends from the university next week," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "We used to have a book club and those old biddies from when you were a teaching assistant," Thomas interrupted, not looking up from his plate. "Mom, you haven't seen them in years. They've probably forgotten all about you." Besides, Miranda added, "You know how your arthritis acts up in damp weather. Better to stay home where it's safe." I didn't have arthritis. I'd never had arthritis. But contradicting them seemed pointless. The conversation shifted again, this time to the mortgage payment. The very mortgage I was paying from the proceeds of selling my home. The interest rate is killing us, Thomas complained. If we could just refinance. Well, maybe if Grandma didn't insist on living here, you could downsize, Cleo interrupted, stabbing a piece of roast with unnecessary force. I mean, my friends' grandparents all live in retirement communities or assisted living. Cleo, Miranda said, but her tone held no real reproach. What? It's true, Cleo continued, her voice rising. We can't even convert the guest room to a media room because Grandma's stuff is everywhere. And she's always hanging around, watching everything we do. It's suffocating. I kept my eyes on my plate, my appetite completely gone. You're just a weight on this family, Cleo continued, her words slicing through the air. Just go to an assisted living place and let us live our lives. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked up to see Thomas and Miranda exchanging glances, neither jumping to my defense. Cleo, Thomas finally said, his voice lacking any real conviction. Apologize. To your grandmother. Why should I? Cleo tossed her napkin on the table. You guys say the same thing when she's not around. Another silence, heavier this time. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died when he was just 10 years old. The boy I'd worked 2 jobs to put through college. The boy who now couldn't meet my eyes. Excuse me, I said quietly, rising from the table with as much dignity as I could muster. No one stopped me as I walked upstairs to my room, the smallest bedroom in the 5-bedroom house, the one farthest from the family's rooms. I closed the door behind me, my hands trembling not with age, but with a cold, clear anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. The next morning, while the house was empty, I made a single phone call to my bank. I canceled every automatic payment to the mortgage company, effective immediately. Then I began to pack. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small suitcase I'd pulled from the back of my closet. The leather was cracked with age, the brass clasps tarnished, a relic from another life. My fingers traced the faded luggage tag, still bearing the address of the home I'd sold 3 years ago. Sycamore Lane. My home for over 40 years. The house wasn't grand like this mansion in Westlake Hills, but it had been mine. Paid off. After decades of careful budgeting on a professor's salary, a modest 3-bedroom with a garden where I'd grown heirloom tomatoes and a study lined with bookshelves that Thomas had built for me when he was in high school, I'd never planned to leave. Even after retirement, I'd imagined growing old there, hosting my book club meetings, continuing to mentor graduate students, maybe eventually having Thomas, Miranda, and Cleo visit on weekends. I'd pictured Cleo staying in the guest room I'd decorated specially for her, with bookshelves filled with the classic novels I'd hoped to introduce her to. You can't keep living alone in that big house, Mom, Thomas had said 3 years ago, shortly after my 69th birthday. What if you fall? What if something happens? I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself, I'd replied. And the house isn't that big. But the seed had been planted, and soon Thomas and Miranda were showing me real estate listings for retirement communities and assisted living facilities. Places with names like Sunset Meadows and Golden Horizons, with photos of elderly people playing bingo and doing seated aerobics. We're just thinking about your future, Miranda had said, her voice honeyed with fake concern. These places have nurses on staff, and you'll be surrounded by people your own age. I'd resisted, of course. I was still teaching a literature course at the community college, still drove my own car, still hosted dinner parties for colleagues. There was nothing wrong with me. Then came the opportunity. Mom, we found the perfect house, Thomas had announced during one of their visits. It's in Westlake Hills, 5 bedrooms, a pool, everything we've dreamed of. But it's just out of our price range, Miranda had finished. Unless. And there it was, the proposal that had seemed so reasonable at the time. I would sell my house and contribute the proceeds toward their new home. In return, I would have my own space in their house, be part of their family, watch Cleo grow up. I'd never have to worry about home maintenance again. It makes financial sense for all of us, Thomas had explained. Property values in your neighborhood are declining. You'd be making a smart investment. What he hadn't mentioned was that my investment wouldn't be in my name. That the money from my house, nearly $400,000 after the mortgage was paid off, would go directly into their dream home. That I'd also be expected to contribute monthly to the new mortgage from my pension and savings. It's still cheaper than those retirement places, Miranda had pointed out when I'd hesitated. And you'll be with family instead of strangers. I'd agreed, partly because I did want to be closer to my only grandchild, and partly because Thomas had made it sound so temporary. Just until we get settled with the new mortgage, he'd said. Then we can reassess. But there had never been any reassessing. Instead, there had been a slow, methodical dismantling of my independence. First, it was suggested that I sell my car. You don't need the expensive insurance and maintenance, Thomas had reasoned. We can drive you wherever you need to go. Except they rarely had time to drive me anywhere, and my requests for rides were often met with sighs and schedule checks, and eventually, "Can't you just order it online, Mom?" Then it was my furniture. "This armchair doesn't really match our aesthetic," Miranda had said, "and your bookshelves are taking up so much space in the guest room." Piece by piece, my belongings had disappeared, donated, sold, or relegated to the garage, where they now sat gathering dust. The only things I'd managed to keep intact were the photo albums and a few boxes of Thomas's childhood mementos, which I'd insisted on preserving. My friends had tried to warn me. "Clarice, are you sure about this arrangement?" Margaret, my oldest friend from the English department, had asked. "It seems like you're giving up an awful lot." "It's temporary," I'd assured her, "and family is important." But slowly, my social circle had contracted. Without a car, I couldn't easily meet friends for lunch. Without my own space, I couldn't host gatherings. Phone calls became less frequent as I had less to share, less life to report on. The final blow had come 6 months ago, when I'd mentioned possibly using some of my savings to take a literature-focused cruise with Margaret. "Mom, that's not a good idea," Thomas had said firmly. "You know the market is volatile right now. You should be conserving your savings." "But it's my money," I'd pointed out, a rare moment of assertion. The look Thomas and Miranda had exchanged was one I'll never forget, a mixture of annoyance and something like panic. "Actually, Mom," Thomas had said carefully, "we were hoping you might consider increasing your contribution to the mortgage, just temporarily. The property taxes went up this year, and with Cleo's college applications coming up." That was when I'd realized the truth. They had no intention of reassessing our arrangement. They expected me to continue funding their lifestyle indefinitely, to quietly fade into the background of their lives, a convenient ATM masquerading as a grandmother. But I'd agreed anyway. Because what choice did I have? Where would I go? My house was sold, my furniture gone, my social circle diminished. I'd become exactly what they wanted, dependent, until yesterday. "You're just a weight on this family." Cleo's words had cut deep, but they'd also cleared away the fog I'd been living in. The comfortable illusion that I was making sacrifices for people who valued me, who loved me. I looked around the small bedroom they'd given me, the one farthest from the family's rooms, the one with the smallest closet, the one that Miranda regularly referred to as, eventually, the media room. Nothing in this room reflected who I was. The bedspread was Miranda's choice, the artwork on the walls selected to match the home's aesthetic. Even the bookshelf held only a fraction of my collection, carefully curated to include nothing that might embarrass them if guests peeked in. Reached for the phone on the nightstand, the landline I'd insisted on keeping when they'd suggested I didn't really need my own phone line. With steady fingers, I dialed a number I hadn't called in nearly 3 years. "Margaret, it's Clarice. I need your help." I was arranging the last of my important documents in a folder when I heard the front door slam with such force that the small crystal bird on my dresser, one of the few treasures I'd managed to keep, trembled precariously. "Mom," Thomas's voice thundered through the house. "Mom, where are you?" I slipped the folder under my pillow and smoothed my cardigan, preparing myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. I'd been expecting it for 3 days, ever since I'd made that call to the bank. My bedroom door flew open without a knock. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face flushed red, a crumpled piece of paper clutched in his fist. Miranda hovered behind him, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his shoulder. "What the hell is this?" Thomas demanded, thrusting the paper toward me. It was a notice from the mortgage company, a warning about missed payment and potential penalties. I met his gaze steadily. "It appears to be a letter from your mortgage company. Don't play dumb, Mom. The payment was declined. Your automatic transfer was canceled." His voice shook with barely controlled rage. "Did you do this?" For a moment I considered lying, pretending confusion, suggesting a bank error. It would have been the easier path, the one I'd taken so many times before to keep the peace. But Cleo's words still echoed in my mind. "You're just a weight on this family." "Yes," I said simply. "I canceled the payments." Miranda gasped as if I'd slapped her. Thomas's face went from red to nearly purple. "You what?" he sputtered. "Why would you, how could you, do you remember what Cleo said at Sunday lunch?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. "About me being a weight on this family?" Thomas had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable before his anger reasserted itself. "She's a teenager, Mom. Teenagers say stupid things." "Yes, they do," I agreed. "But she was only repeating what she's heard from you and Miranda." Miranda stepped forward, her face a mask of injured innocence. "That's completely unfair, Clarice. We've welcomed you into our home, given you a place to live." "A place I paid for," I interrupted, surprising even myself with my boldness. "Or, have you forgotten that the down payment for this house came from the sale of my home? That I've been contributing to your mortgage payments for 3 years?" "That was the agreement," Thomas said stiffly. "You live here. You help with expenses. It's only fair." "Fair?" The word hung in the air between us. Was it fair when you convinced me to sell my fully paid home by claiming it was temporary? Was it fair when you systematically removed every piece of my furniture, every memento that didn't fit your aesthetic? Was it fair when you cut me off from my friends, my activities, my independence? Thomas's face hardened. "If you're so unhappy here, Mom, you're free to leave. There are plenty of nice assisted living facilities, which I would have to pay for," I finished for him. "Which is exactly what this has always been about, isn't it? My money." "That's absurd," Miranda snapped. "We've given you a home, a family. You've given me a small bedroom in a house I helped purchase," I corrected her. "You've given me a seat at the far end of the table, where I can be conveniently ignored. You've given me the clear message that I'm tolerated only as long as I keep funding your lifestyle." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache despite everything. "Look, Mom, if this is about what Cleo said, I'll talk to her. She'll apologize. But this..." He waved the mortgage notice. "This is serious. We can't afford this house without your contribution." "I'm aware of that," I said. "I've been aware since you first showed me the listing and explained that it was just out of your price range unless I helped." Miranda stepped closer, her voice dropping to that condescending tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. "Clarice, perhaps you're confused. The arrangement benefits all of us. You don't have to worry about living alone, about maintenance, or yard work." "I never worried about those things," I said firmly. "I loved my garden. I loved my independence. I gave it all up because I thought my family needed me, valued me." Thomas's face shifted, calculation replacing anger. "Of course we value you, Mom. this is just a misunderstanding. Why don't we sit down? Talk this through like adults? There's nothing to discuss, I replied. I've made my decision. What decision? Thomas asked, his voice suddenly wary. I reached under my pillow and pulled out the folder. I've been keeping records, Thomas, of every payment I've made toward this house, of every conversation where you or Miranda discussed my finances, of every time I was told I couldn't access my own money because it needed to be conserved. Miranda's face went pale. You've been recording us? Not all the time, I said. Just when it became clear what was happening. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Thomas lunged forward and tried to grab the folder, but I was quicker than he expected. I stepped back, holding it firmly against my chest. It's all backed up, I told him quietly, and my attorney has copies. Attorney? Thomas's voice rose in disbelief. What attorney? Since when do you have an attorney? Since I realized I needed to protect myself from my own family. The room fell silent. Thomas and Miranda exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that excluded me even in this moment of confrontation. So what now? Thomas finally asked, his voice cold. Are you threatening to sue us? Your own son? The pain in my chest intensified, but I kept my voice steady. I'm not threatening anything. Thomas, I'm simply informing you that the situation has changed. I will no longer be contributing to your mortgage. What you do with that information is up to you. Miranda's mask of concern slipped completely, revealing the calculating woman beneath. If you think we'll keep supporting you while you pull this stunt, you're delusional. No more free room and board. No more… Free? I echoed, unable to hold back a short, bitter laugh. I've paid over $300,000 to live in this house. There's nothing free about it. Thomas grabbed Miranda's arm, silencing her. What exactly do you want, Mom? I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the man he'd become. I want what I've always wanted, Thomas. Respect, honesty. To be treated like a person, not a checkbook. Face hardened. Well, you've made your point, and your choice. Don't expect us to bail you out when you realize you can't make it on your own. With that, he turned and stormed out, pulling Miranda with him. The door slammed behind them, leaving me standing alone in the small room that had never really been mine. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling slightly. I'd done it. After years of acquiescence, of silence, of putting everyone else's needs before my own, I'd finally stood my ground. I picked up the phone and dialed. Margaret? It's done. They know. Are you okay? Her voice was warm with concern. No, I admitted. But I will be. 1 month before Cleo's outburst, the realization didn't come as a lightning bolt. It was more like dawn breaking, a slow, gradual illumination of what had been hidden in darkness. I was sitting in the garden, ostensibly reading, but actually listening to Thomas and Miranda on the patio, their voices carrying clearly through the open French doors. The interest rates are dropping again, Thomas was saying. If we refinance now, we could pull out some equity. For what? Miranda asked. The kitchen is already perfect. I was thinking about that vacation property in Aspen. The one I showed you last week. Miranda's laugh tinkled through the air. Thomas, be serious. We can't afford a second home. We could if we used Mom's savings as a down payment. She's got at least $200,000 sitting in that account, doing nothing. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told Thomas how much was in my savings. I'd never authorized him to check my accounts. She'd never agree to that, Miranda said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. She doesn't have to know the details, Thomas replied. We just tell her it's a smart investment opportunity. You know how she is. She never questions me about finances. The book slipped from my fingers, landing with a soft thud on the grass. They were talking about taking my savings, The money I'd set aside over decades of careful budgeting, the security. I'd planned to leave for Thomas and Cleo when I was gone. Besides, Thomas continued, it's not like she has any use for it. What's she going to do, go on a cruise, at her age? Miranda laughed again. God, can you imagine? She'd probably get lost and end up in someone else's cabin. I sat very still, letting their words wash over me. I wasn't shocked so much as profoundly disappointed. Deep down, I'd known for some time that Thomas and Miranda saw me as a resource rather than a person. But hearing it stated so baldly, so callously crystallized everything. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, considering my options. I could confront them, but what would that achieve? Thomas would deny it, or worse, make me feel guilty for eavesdropping. I could simply refuse to give them any more money, but they'd find ways to pressure me. They always did. I needed a plan, a real plan, not just a reaction. And I needed help. The next morning, I told Miranda I was going to the library. She barely looked up from her phone. Don't be too long. We're having guests for dinner, and I need you to polish the silver. I didn't go to the library. Instead, I took the bus downtown to the offices of Harriet Goldman, a lawyer I'd known casually during my teaching days. She'd been a guest lecturer in one of my classes, discussing literary depictions of justice. We weren't close friends, but she'd always struck me as straightforward and ethical. Professor Bennett, she greeted me, rising from behind her desk with a warm smile. What a pleasant surprise. Please, call me Clarice, I said, settling into the chair across from her. It's been a long time since I taught anyone. Once a professor, always a professor, she replied. What brings you to my office today? I took a deep breath. I need legal advice about financial exploitation by family members. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of professional concern. I see. Why don't you tell me what's going on? For the next hour, I laid out everything: the sale of my house, the ongoing mortgage payments, the gradual erosion of my independence, and finally, the conversation I'd overheard about my savings. Harriet took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression growing more troubled as I continued. This is unfortunately common, she said when I finished. Elder financial abuse is one of the fastest-growing forms of exploitation, particularly when perpetrated by family members. The good news is, there are steps we can take to protect you and your assets. What kind of steps? I asked. First, we need to secure your remaining finances. I recommend changing your bank accounts immediately. New bank, new account numbers, new passwords. Make sure Thomas has no access whatsoever. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness at having my suspicions confirmed. What about the money I've already contributed to the house? Harriet sighed. That's more complicated. You said your name isn't on the mortgage or deed? No. Thomas said it was simpler that way. I'm sure he did, she said dryly. Without written documentation of your arrangement, it becomes a matter of your word against theirs. But, she held up a hand as she saw my face fall. That doesn't mean we're without options. Do you have any evidence of your contributions? Bank statements showing transfers? Emails or texts discussing the arrangement? I thought for a moment. I have bank statements, and there might be some emails from when we first discussed selling my house. Good. And from now on, I want you to document everything. Keep a journal of relevant conversations. If possible, record discussions about finances. Is that legal? I asked. In Texas, as long as one party to the conversation consents to the recording, that would be you, it's legal. But even without recordings, contemporaneous notes can be persuasive evidence. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Clarice, I have to ask, what's your ultimate goal here? Do you want to try to recover the money? Do you want to stay in the house? What outcome are you hoping for? It was a question I'd been asking myself all night. I want my independence back, I said, finally. I want to live somewhere that's mine, where I make the rules and decisions. And yes, I want to recover as much of my money as possible, but mainly, I want Thomas to understand what he's done, to acknowledge it. Harriet nodded. Then we need a comprehensive strategy, one that secures your future while giving you leverage to potentially recover some of your investment. Over the next few weeks, I followed Harriet's advice meticulously. I opened new accounts at a different bank, using Margaret's address for all correspondence. I began documenting every conversation about money, keeping detailed notes in a journal. I hid inside an old photo album, the one place I knew Miranda would never look, as she considered family photos clutter. With Harriet's help, I found a small apartment in a senior living community. Not assisted living, but independent apartments for people over 65. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, bright, and most importantly, it would be mine. The monthly rent was within my budget, especially now that I wouldn't be paying Thomas's mortgage. I began quietly removing my most treasured possessions from the house: photo albums, jewelry, important documents. A few items at a time, nothing that would be immediately noticed. Margaret kept them safe for me, along with the small suitcase I'd packed with essential clothing. I recorded Thomas and Miranda's conversations whenever they discussed finances, using a small device Harriet had recommended. It felt strange, almost dirty, to be secretly recording my own son. But each time I hesitated, I remembered his voice. It's not like she has any use for it. The final piece fell into place when Harriet reviewed my bank statements from the past 3 years. Clarice, do you realize you've contributed over $300,000 to their household since you moved in? Between the proceeds from your house sale and the monthly mortgage payments? I hadn't actually calculated the total. The number took my breath away. That's more than I thought. It's financial abuse, Harriet said firmly, and we have the documentation to prove it. So what now? I asked. Now we prepare for confrontation, she replied, because one way or another they're going to realize what you've done, and they won't take it well. She was right, of course. I knew Thomas and Miranda would be furious when they discovered I'd canceled the mortgage payments. They'd try to guilt me, to threaten me, to make me feel incompetent and selfish. But for the first time in years, I felt prepared. I had a plan. I had evidence, and most importantly, I had rediscovered my voice. I was ready to break my silence. The tension in the house had become unbearable. For a week after I canceled the mortgage payments, Thomas and Miranda alternated between icy silence and aggressive demands. They'd tried everything: guilt, threats, even a clumsy attempt at reconciliation involving Cleo and a hastily purchased bouquet. "Grandma, I'm sorry for what I said," Cleo had mumbled, thrusting the flowers toward me while Thomas and Miranda hovered behind her with expectant smiles. I'd accepted the flowers with grace. "Thank you, Cleo. That's kind of you." Thomas had immediately jumped in. "See, Mom? We're all family here. Families have disagreements, but they work through them. Now, about those mortgage payments." I'd simply smiled and returned to my room. Now, sitting at the dining table for the first time since that fateful Sunday lunch, I waited calmly as the family gathered. I'd requested this meeting, insisted on it actually, and chosen the timing carefully. Saturday morning, when no one could claim work or school commitments. Thomas entered first, his face a careful mask of patience that didn't reach his eyes. Miranda followed, lips pressed into a thin line. Cleo slouched in last, looking bored and resentful at having her weekend interrupted. "Thank you for joining me," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I have some important things to share with all of you." "Mom, if this is about the mortgage again," Thomas started. I held up a hand, surprising him into silence. "Please let me finish, Thomas. This isn't just about the mortgage. It's about honesty, respect, and family." I placed a folder on the table. Not the same one I'd shown Thomas before, but a new one, carefully prepared with Harriet's help. 3 years ago, I sold my home and contributed the proceeds, $372,000, to the purchase of this house. Since then, I've paid $2,100 every month toward your mortgage. That's another $75,600. Miranda shifted uncomfortably. Cleo's expression had changed from boredom to surprise. In total, I've contributed nearly $450,000 to this household, I continued, my voice quiet but firm. Almost $500,000 that I earned over a lifetime of teaching, saving, and careful planning. We never forced you to do that, Thomas interrupted. It was a mutual arrangement. Was it? I asked, opening the folder. Let's review that. Arrangement, shall we? I pulled out a printed email from Thomas, dated 3 years ago. Mom, this is just temporary until we get settled with the new mortgage. Then we can reassess. Your exact words, Thomas. He flushed. Market conditions changed. You know that. I do know about changing conditions, I agreed. Like how my role in this house changed from welcomed family member to convenient source of income. Or how my furniture disappeared piece by piece because it didn't match your aesthetic. Or how my social life was systematically dismantled because it was inconvenient for me to see my friends. Miranda leaned forward, her voice taking on that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. Clarice, you're exaggerating. We've always treated you as family. Is that why you and Thomas discussed using my savings to buy a vacation property in Aspen? I asked calmly, the color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. I withdrew a small recording device from my pocket and pressed play. Thomas and Miranda's voices filled the room, discussing my savings as if they were already theirs to spend. I watched their expressions change from shock to outrage to something like fear. You recorded us? Thomas sputtered when I stopped the playback. That's perfectly legal in Texas, I finished for him. Single-party consent. Cleo was staring at her parents with wide eyes. You were going to take Grandma's money for a vacation house? Neither Thomas nor Miranda answered her. Their gazes were fixed on me, a mixture of anger and calculation in their eyes. What do you want? Thomas finally asked, his voice cold. Is this blackmail? No, Thomas. This is clarity, I replied. I'm not here to threaten or punish you. I'm here to inform you of my decisions. I placed 3 envelopes on the table. This first envelope contains a detailed accounting of all the money I've contributed to this household. The second contains my formal request for financial restitution, not for the full amount, but for what my attorney considers a fair settlement given the circumstances. Attorney? Miranda echoed faintly. Harriet Goldman, I said. She specializes in elder financial abuse cases. Thomas's face darkened. So you are threatening to sue us? I hope it doesn't come to that, I said honestly. The third envelope contains my notice that I'll be moving out next week. I've secured an apartment at Riverside Terrace. That senior place off Barton Creek? Miranda asked, looking genuinely surprised. But it's so basic. It's what I can afford now, I said simply. After contributing so much to this house, my resources are more limited than they should be at my age. A heavy silence fell over the table. Cleo was the first to break it. You're really leaving? She asked, and for the first time in years, I heard something like genuine emotion in her voice. Because of what I said? I looked at my granddaughter, so young, so influenced by her parents' values, yet perhaps not entirely lost to them. No, Cleo, not because of what you said, but because of what your words revealed, about how I'm viewed in this family. I turned back to Thomas and Miranda. I deserve better than to be treated as a burden, an ATM, or an inconvenience. I deserve respect. Thomas stared at the envelopes, then at me. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. The cost of fighting me versus settling, the public embarrassment if this went to court, The financial strain of suddenly having to make the full mortgage payment themselves. You won't. Win if you sue, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps not, I acknowledged. But the discovery process would be illuminating. All your financial records, all our conversations about my money, all laid bare for a judge to examine. Miranda's hand flew to her throat. You wouldn't. I don't want to, I said truthfully. I'd much prefer an amicable resolution, one that acknowledges the contributions I've made and provides some restitution. How much? Thomas asked bluntly. $150,000, I replied. About a third of what I've contributed. Enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life without financial stress. That's impossible, Miranda exclaimed. We don't have that kind of money. You have equity in this house, I pointed out. The house my money helped purchase. You could refinance. Thomas's jaw tightened. And if we refuse? I met his gaze steadily. Then we'll let the courts decide. The room fell silent again. I could see the turmoil on Thomas's face. Anger, calculation, perhaps even a flicker of shame, quickly suppressed. I'll need time to think about this, he said finally. Of course, I replied, rising from the table. You have until Friday. After that, my attorney will proceed with legal action. As I turned to leave, Cleo's voice stopped me. Grandma? I looked back at her, this girl who had grown so distant, so dismissive of me. Yes, Cleo? Her eyes were uncertain, confused. Did you really pay for half this house? I nodded. Yes, Cleo, I did. Then why did Mom and Dad always act like they were doing you a favor by letting you live here? From the corner of my eye, I saw Thomas and Miranda exchange alarmed glances. For the first time, their carefully constructed narrative was crumbling, and from the most unexpected source. That, I said gently, is a question you should ask them. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen window, casting a warm glow over the small breakfast table where I sat with my coffee. 6 months had passed since I'd moved into my apartment at Riverside Terrace, and the place finally felt like home. It wasn't grand, just a one-bedroom unit with a small kitchen, living room, and a balcony overlooking a courtyard garden. But it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, every book on the shelves had been chosen by me, arranged according to my preferences, not to match someone else's aesthetic. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood of the table. Oh, vintage piece I'd found at an estate sale, similar to the one I'd had in my old house. Margaret had helped me refinish it, the two of us laughing like schoolgirls as we sanded and stained on her back patio. Those had been good days, days of rediscovery and reconnection. The settlement with Thomas had come through 3 months ago. Not the full amount I'd requested, but enough, $120,000, plus the return of some family heirlooms that had mysteriously disappeared into their attic. Harriet had advised me to accept it rather than pursue a lengthy court battle. It's a fair compromise, she'd said, and it gives you the clean break you need. She was right. The money, combined with my pension and Social Security, meant I could live comfortably in my new home. I could afford the occasional dinner out, tickets to the symphony, even the literature cruise with Margaret I'd been planning when this all began. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I checked the caller ID, a habit I'd developed during those final tense weeks at Thomas's house, and smiled when I saw Margaret's name. Good morning, I answered. How was your date last night? Margaret laughed, a rich, warm sound that never failed to lift my spirits. Richard was a perfect gentleman. He took me to that new Italian place downtown, and we've made plans for the symphony next weekend. But that's not why I'm calling. Have you checked your email yet? No. Why? The literature department is hosting a retirement dinner for Professor K. Williams next month. They want all former faculty to attend, and they specifically asked about you. Apparently, some of your former students are organizing a tribute. Warmth spread through my chest. Really? After all these years? You made an impact, Clarice. Your students remember you. She paused. Will you go? I know it might be awkward. If Thomas and Miranda are there. I considered this. Thomas's wife, Miranda, served on several university committees, mainly for the social prestige. The possibility of seeing them was real. Yes, I decided. I'll go. I won't let the possibility of an uncomfortable encounter keep me from celebrating Robert's retirement. He was a wonderful colleague. That's my girl, Margaret said approvingly. Now, what are you doing today? Book club this morning, I replied. Then lunch with Harriet. She wants to introduce me to a friend who runs a literacy program for adults. They're looking for volunteer instructors. You're busier than I am, Margaret laughed. I'll let you go then. Call me after your lunch. I want all the details. After we hung up, I finished my coffee and prepared for the day. The book club had been one of my first steps toward rebuilding a social life. Comprised mainly of retired professors and teachers, it offered exactly the kind of intellectual stimulation I'd been missing. Today we were discussing Mrs. Dalloway, one of my favorites. As I gathered my notes and slipped on a light cardigan, a knock at the door surprised me. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Cleo stood in the hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. My granddaughter looked different, less polished, more authentic somehow. Her designer clothes had been replaced with simple jeans and a university sweatshirt. Her hair, usually straightened to Miranda's specifications, fell in natural waves. Around her face, Cleo, I said, genuinely surprised. This is unexpected. Hi, Grandma. She bit her lip. Can I come in? Just for a minute. I know you're probably busy. I stepped aside, gesturing her in. Of course. I always have time for you. Her eyes widened slightly as she entered, taking in the cozy space I'd created. Your place is really nice, she said, sounding almost surprised. It feels like you. Thank you. I led her to the living room. Would you like some tea or coffee? No, I'm okay. She sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I wanted to talk to you. Without Mom and Dad around, I sat across from her, waiting patiently. Whatever had brought her here had clearly taken courage. I started college last month, she said finally. UT Austin. I'm living in the dorms. Congratulations, I said warmly. What are you studying? English. Literature. A small smile played at her lips. Like you did. This surprised me. Thomas and Miranda had always pushed Cleo toward business or law, practical fields with high earning potential. Your parents must be proud, I said carefully. Cleo snorted. They hate it. Dad says I'm wasting my potential. Mom keeps sending me links to business school applications. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. That's actually why I'm here. I found some of your old lecture notes in the attic. About Virginia Woolf. They're amazing, Grandma. The insights, the connections to other works. I never knew you were so intelligent? I supplied with a small smile. She had the grace to look embarrassed. I was going to say passionate about literature. I am, I corrected myself. Teaching was never just a job for me, it was a calling. Cleo nodded, then took a deep breath. My professor assigned to the Lighthouse for my modernist literature class. I remembered your notes mentioned it, so I've been reading them, but there are parts I don't understand. I was wondering if maybe, if you wouldn't mind, helping me? The request, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to my eyes. For years I'd tried to share my love of literature with Cleo, only to be met with indifference or outright disdain. Now here she was asking for my guidance. I would be honored, I said softly. A genuine smile lit up her face, not the practiced. Perfect smile Miranda had taught her, but something real and a little vulnerable. Really? That would be awesome. Of course. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been hovering since she arrived. Does your father know you're here? The key. Smile faded. No, they don't talk about you much. When they do, it's... She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. It's not complimentary, I finished for her. No. She met my eyes again. But I think they're wrong. About a lot of things. Including literature as a worthwhile field of study? I asked with a small smile. Including how they treated you. She said quietly. I've been thinking a lot about it, about what happened. The things you said that day, about paying for the house and them taking your money. I didn't want to believe it at first, but... But? Last month, I overheard them talking about how they might have to sell the house. Dad said something about how they never should have bought a place they couldn't really afford without your help. She twisted her hands in her lap. That's when I realized you were telling the truth. They really did use you for your money. The pain in her voice touched me deeply. It couldn't be easy for her to recognize this truth about her parents. People are complicated, Cleo, I said gently. Your parents aren't villains. They made choices. Selfish choices, yes, but driven by their own fears and desires. Just as I made the choice to let them take advantage of me for too long. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry for what I said that day. About you being a weight on the family. I didn't really think that. I was just repeating what I'd heard them say. No, I assured her. And I've never held it against you. In a way, I should thank you. Your words were the wake-up call I needed. We talked for another hour. About Virginia Woolf, about her classes, about her new freedom in the dorms. As she prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. Could I come back next week? Maybe we could make this a regular thing? I could bring my assignments, and we could discuss them. I'd like that very much, I said, warmth filling my heart. How about Saturdays? We could have lunch, then work on your literature questions. That sounds perfect. She surprised me with a quick hug. Thank you, Grandma. After she left, I stood by the window, watching as she walked toward the bus stop. The morning sun highlighted the natural red in her hair. My color, not Miranda's carefully maintained blonde. For the first time, I could see pieces of myself in her, beyond just physical resemblance. The book club could wait. Today had brought something far more precious than literary discussion. It had brought possibility. The chance to build a relationship with my granddaughter based on genuine connection, not obligation or financial dependency. As I picked up the phone to call Margaret with the news, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Standing straight, eyes bright, a smile playing on my lips. I hardly recognized myself. Gone was the woman who had silently accepted disrespect and manipulation. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, unafraid to claim her worth. It had taken 72 years, but I had finally found my voice. And in that voice, I had found myself. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.